Right, so Tory wombat Lee Anderson, aka 30p Lee, so called because he thinks you can feed yourself for that. The shame of Ashfield, a man so depraved that he's made it his mission to prove anyone asking for a pay rise and anyone queuing up to a food bank just isn't trying hard enough to make ends meet and regularly gets rinsed for it as people line up to demonstrate the man's never-ending seeming supply of stupidity and dishonesty. Anderson thinks that people using food banks need to get better at budgeting, maybe, or need to learn how to cook, perhaps, and doesn't believe it's that many people anyway. He doesn't think nurses can be using food banks on 35k a year, for example, when many, of course, aren't advanced enough to be earning such a wage, and even if they are, the cost of living is now so high, they still can't make ends meet. It's simply not enough. Given he's on 84k a year, though, it's a bit rich coming from an MP to say anything of the sort. When was the last time they turned down giving themselves a pay rise, after all? Anyway, in his ongoing bid to keep on disappointing voters, the walking embarrassment has dropped another whopping great clanger and been caught out as per usual. He's not very bright, really. Trying to paint the working classes as undeserving of further aid to get by in cost of living crisis Tory Britain. As for instance, of people getting by exactly as Anderson says we can, and of course can't, he used Katie, one of his office staff, as an example. Didn't even have the brains to change her name for her own privacy. He threw her under a bus, essentially, to keep escalating his own poorly received narratives on poverty, knowing, as he ought to have done if he isn't as stupid as he is a total prat-face, that people would dig into exactly who Katie was. 30p Lee, in an ill-fated tweet featuring a smiley Katie, said that Katie works for me. She is single and earns less than 30k, rents a room for 775 PCM in central London, has student debt, £120 a month spent on travelling to work, saves money every month, goes on foreign holidays, and doesn't need to use a food bank. It didn't take long for the wags on Twitter to find out more about Katie, though, and corroborate it thanks to Anderson's helpful photograph. But let's just unpack what he said there. He pays Katie less than 30k a year. A decent wage in most areas, but London? Well, let's take 30k as her salary figure. We know it's less than that. Anderson said so, but let's assume it's near that. It's about 10k below average earnings in London, then, in which case her take-home pay would be £24,400, roughly, after working out the bills from what Anderson quoted. I'm not minded to publish my workings. You can work it out for yourself if you're so inclined. I don't really want to make Katie the focus of this more than I have to. But you can quite comfortably have that to cover whatever Katie's remaining living expenses would be. Food, certainly, likely other bills too. Having had a look at room rents in central London, it would seem she's paying quite the competitive rent. So not really reflective of most room renters, though may include some bills which might be included elsewhere, might not be included in hers. Who are we to know? We're at the point of spitballing here. We can only guess, and it's pointless to try. London itself has the biggest affordability crisis in the country, though. As much as people are struggling with the cost of living crisis nationwide, it is worst of all there, with residential housing review site Home Views saying for a single person like Katie in London right now, average living costs have hit £3,000 a month. Katie brings home each month £1,000 less than that, yet can still do the foreign holidays and save, apparently. Now, maybe she can. Maybe her individual circumstances allow for that. But that wouldn't make her typical of single working renters in London, as 30p Lee was attempting to imply, would it? What makes poor Katie even less typical, though, is that she is anything but poor. She formerly attended a private school in York, which charges significant fees per term. She's the daughter of an army brigadier himself, privately educated too. So hers is a family with means, it would seem. Definitely not your typical single London renter, as Lee Anderson would like you to think. Anyway, enough of Katie. She's not really the issue. She's been exploited enough by her own bloody boss, opened up to online abuse. Who knows if he even had her permission to do so? Not that that's really the point either. Let's not make the issue about her, because that is what 30p Lee wants us to do after all. So we aren't talking about him, which is absolutely what we should be doing. She's the petard Anderson has hoisted himself by, and that should count for something because he has been hammered for this, and rightly so. Using an employee as a human shield to excuse his own disgusting attitudes towards poverty in what surely must constitute workplace harassment and bullying, and all to just continue his war against the poor by trying to paint those struggling as to blame for their own circumstances, to excuse his views that nobody deserves a pay rise and we all need to toughen up, in his opinion. The gaslighting is on a whole other level. This is a guy whose expenses are over £220,000. This is a guy who once claimed 94p on expenses for an office banner. This is a guy to whom a 10 pence knockoff Weetabix and 16 pence worth of milk is a meal in his fevered mind. Thank God he never became a dietitian, but what a pity he chose politics. In fact, to get elected, he pulled off a con job with a mate of his. He set up a pretend random doorstep interview in front of a film crew, and we know it was a setup because the idiot was wearing the mic the news team had given him when he set it up, and they'd recorded it all. Sadly, Ashfield still elected him. He gaslit voters then, and he's gaslighting them again now at a member of his own staff's expense. I can really see why he has the 7th highest turnover of staff in Parliament. Who the hell would want to work for him? Living within our means, the last person anyone should take notice of over that is Lee Anderson. People's circumstances change. Life throws people bad hands, unemployment, redundancy, bereavements, ill health, life-changing injury, governments that insist on keeping you poor. All can lead to drastic changes in the financial situations of people through no fault of their own. And the safety net that used to be there to catch us, meant to be there so we can keep ourselves afloat, has been shrunken and reduced so it no longer functionally works in the public interest, and too often ends up sinking people instead. The days of listening to people be referred to as shirkers or skivers or loud swingers or feckless spendthrifts has to end, has to be rebuked in the strongest possible terms. And those still singing from those hymn sheets like 30p Lee need castigating in the strongest possible terms, especially so when they use one-size-fits-all examples, as he did here, that are nothing of the sort. He only won his seat for the first time in 2019. Let's not have him win it again.